Well, good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my apologies for what I thought was going to be a little quicker, but did manage to stretch out. We are. The good news is although there is another series of votes anticipated, it won't be till probably 8 p.m. We will be well done and on our way by then, so we shouldn't have any further interruptions. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry to review the National Forest systems and active forest management will come to order. Once again, I want to welcome everyone to this hearing of the Conservation and Forestry Subcommittee. The health of our national forests is an issue of vital importance for rural America and, quite frankly, for all of America when you look at the values and the benefits in terms of timber resources, the headwaters of our navigable waters, our drinking water, just so many great benefits, filters, carbon sink, and so it should be a concern to each and every American. Not only are national forests a source of immense natural beauty, they provide us with natural resources, healthy watersheds, recreational opportunities, and wildlife habitat. But perhaps most importantly, these serve as economic engines for the surrounding local communities. As I like to say, it's fulfilling the promise that was made when these lands were taken out of the private sector and put into the public sector, that we would keep whole economically and allow for robust growth among our rural communities. Our national forests are capable of providing and sustaining these economic benefits, but they need proper management in order to do so, which is the topic of today's hearing, and to review the National Forest System and the active forest management. The U.S. Forest Service manages more than 193 million acres of land across 41 states, and within those 41 states are over 700 counties containing national forest lands. Now, these counties and the communities within them rely on us to be good stewards, to be good managers of these federal lands, and there is a direct correlation between forest health and vibrant rural community health. The people living in these rural areas depend on well-managed national forests to foster jobs and economic opportunities. These jobs can come from diverse sources such as timbering, energy production, or recreation. However, if those jobs disappear, so do jobs that support those industries. And it's a snowball effect from there, threatening school systems and infrastructure in these rural communities. Thus, effective management and Forest Service decisions have significant consequences on our constituents who live in and around our national forests. Healthier, well-managed national forests are more sustainable for generations to come due to the continual risk of catastrophic fires and invasive species outbreaks. Now, especially with the decline in timber harvesting and revenue to counties from timber receipts over the past 2 decades, rural economies will benefit immensely from increased timber harvest. I would also say that we need to work together to focus on the other 2 parts of that triangle, and that is to promote our timber markets and to enhance the value of our timber. It's a little more challenging. That's getting inside the heads of the consumers, but I think we all have an obligation to be working on all 3 of those things. Now, we can continue supporting a diverse population of wildlife through active land management practices such as prescribed burns. Our national forests are not museums, obviously, and were never intended to sit idle. And I say it frequently, but national forests are not national parks. When Congress created the National Forest System more than 100 years ago, it was designed so that surrounding communities would benefit from multiple uses. Our national forests are meant to provide timber, oil, natural gas, wildlife habitat, recreational opportunities, and clean drinking water for rural communities across America. The 2014 Farm Bill provided the tools for the Forest Service to successfully manage our national forests and help boost economies of surrounding communities. And these provisions allow for expedited planning and projections, as well as reauthorized programs to allow the Forest Service to streamline projects such as timber sales and restoration projects and projects across neighboring jurisdictions. That said, we know that good public policy is not static, it's dynamic, and the purpose of this hearing is to help us as a subcommittee look at what other legislative opportunities may exist out there to provide tools to the Forest Service to achieve that overall objective that we have of healthy forests and healthy rural communities economically. Now I want to thank Chief Tidwell and I want to welcome him. Appreciate, Chief, you appearing again before us today, and I look forward to hearing more from you on how these Farm Bill programs are being implemented. I also look forward to hearing from our second panel witnesses today. We have a wide variety of stakeholders who would tell us what they think the Forest Service does well and what they should be improving upon. And we will hear how active forest management not only jumpstarts the rural economy, but also helps wildlife species and prevents and reduces the impact of fires. And I thank each of our witnesses for taking the time to be here today. I'd also like to welcome Sue Swanson from the 5th District of Pennsylvania with the Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group, who lives in Kane, Pennsylvania. And I now recognize, my pleasure to recognize the ranking member, Ms. Lujan Grisham, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here for the second subcommittee on forestry and conservation hearing for this Congress, and I think we've gotten off to a good and a strong start, and I look forward to continuing the subcommittee's work as we begin to review forestry programs. New Mexico is home to 9.1 million acres of Forest Service land, including the Gila National Forest, which is the 6th largest forest in the continental U.S. Our national forests provide us with many benefits, including, as you've heard from the chairman, high quality water, wildlife habitats, forest products, and opportunities for outdoor recreation and education. And clearly, protecting and improving the management of our forests are top priorities for me and many of the communities in my district. I believe the chairman shares this passion, as do many of the subcommittee members. I hope that today's hearing will be the first, frankly, of many opportunities for the subcommittee to take a real in-depth look at forestry issues. And more specifically, I'm looking forward to discussing the impact that wildfires and drought have had and will continue to have on forests in the Southwest, and not just forests, but the surrounding communities. Most recently, New Mexico, like many other states in the Southwest, experienced record-breaking fires that burned hundreds of thousands of acres and resulted in millions of dollars of damages. These are real problems that must be addressed and are threatening to devastate many parts of my state and the district. And that's, quite frankly, before we talk about the very public safety issues related to the men and women who fight those wildfires and the communities in which homes and businesses and lives are destroyed. These are real problems that have got to be addressed and are threatening to devastate many more parts of the state and the district. The current cycle of fire borrowing is not working, and I think contributes to more fires. For those not familiar with the term, fire borrowing occurs when the Forest Service has to dip into other programs to pay for rising fire suppression costs. Last year, USDA sent a report to Congress notifying us that the agency needed $470 million more to fight wildfires that season. This trend is not new, nor do I expect it to go away. Both USDA and DOI have had to divert funds from other firefighting or fire prevention programs, to fund suppression efforts for 7 of the last 12 years. In addition, we should be looking at innovative and more cost-efficient ways to suppress fires. Now, I recently had the opportunity to meet with a company in my district that has developed larger planes or tankers that can deliver 4 times more retardant than any other tanker employed today. This allows them to put out fires much more quickly, which saves lives and reduces costs and damages. In closing, I hope this hearing will help identify ways that Congress can help prevent wildfires, improve the way we respond to fires, and assist communities with post-fire recovery. I welcome Chief Tidwell and the rest of the witnesses joining us today. Laura McCarthy works in New Mexico and was recently recognized as the New Mexico Environmental Leader of the Year for establishing the Rio Grande Water Fund, a very important project in New Mexico, and I know we're going to hear more about that in her testimony, or at least I hope so today. I look forward to today's testimony. I thank the chair, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and the chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so the witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure there's ample time for questions. The chair would like to remind members that to be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who are present at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in the order of their arrival, and I appreciate the members' understanding. Witnesses are reminded to limit their oral presentations to 5 minutes, and all written statements will be included in the record. And I'm pleased to welcome our witness to the table, the first panel, the Honorable Tom Tidwell, Chief of the United States Forest Service. Chief Tidwell started his career as a firefighter, and while going to school, and he has truly demonstrated a career that, trying to make a difference within the Forest Service, and held a lot of different titles and jobs, and pleased he's serving as our Chief of our Forest Service today. And Chief Tidwell, please begin with your testimony when you're ready.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Chair, members of the subcommittee, once again, it's an opportunity. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, to be able to talk about very important subject, and that's the health of our national forests, the health of our nation's forests. And I appreciate both of the opening remarks that so clearly describe the overall benefits that the American public they rely on from these lands. I also want to thank you for the Farm Bill. We're just beginning to start to implement using those new authorities, and it's really going to make a difference to be able to help us to support rural economies while improving the health of our nation's forests. As you've already said, today our national forests are really, I think they're more important to the nation than ever. Restoring the health and resilience of these forests, it not only generates all the benefits you've described, but it is also those economic benefits, those economic engines for so many of our rural communities. And FY 2011, for example, the various activities on the national forests and grasslands, they contributed over $36 billion to America's gross domestic product and supported nearly 450,000 jobs. But to be able to maintain all those benefits, those economic activities, it's essential that we continue to restore and maintain these lands. And it's one of the reasons why we continue to increase the number of acres we're treating every year. In 2013, we treated 2.5 million acres to restore the health of these lands. And in FY14, we increased that to 2.9 million acres. And at the same time, we're also increasing the outputs, for instance, with timber production. In FY13, we sold 2.6 billion board feet. In FY14, that went up to 2.8. This year, we have a target of 2.9. And in 2016, with our budget request, we're estimating we'll be at 3.2 billion, which just demonstrates the importance for us to be able to do the work on the land to produce these key benefits. Now, the way we've been able to continue to increase the acres treated and produce these key outputs is several innovative restoration efforts that we have going. The first is collaboration. This concept of working with communities in a way that they have more of a say, a greater engagement, is really building more support for us to be able to take on projects across large landscapes. We have our collaborative forest landscape restoration projects that are taking on, looking at landscapes from about 130 to over 600,000 acres, and being able to dedicate multi-year funding to these areas. It's really proving to be a success on these 23 projects. We're also improving our approach on NEPA, to be able to not only do large-scale projects, but also to use the concept of adaptive management that allows us to do one set of analysis that allows us to do the work that's needed over a set period of years. We're continuing to expand our markets, which is essential for us to be able to have a way to put the biomass of saw timber to use. And then with the Farm Bill. And I look at the Farm Bill authorities, they're going to help us to expand the work. Stewardship contracting, thank you for making that permanent. The Good Neighbor Authority, the insect and disease provisions that will help us to reduce the amount of time it takes for us to be able to do the analysis, and also the new categorical exclusion for us to be able to treat up to 3,000 acres with that CE. Now, with the passage of the Farm Bill, we moved quickly to work with the governors to designate 46.7 million acres where we can use the Insect and Disease Authority. But many of our projects in FY14 and FY15 we already had the planning started. So we're really going to see the benefits of the Farm Bill really start coming together at the start of this year, but especially next year. For this year, we have 9 projects already that are lined up to be able to use these new authorities. So we'll be able to demonstrate the benefits of that. And then also with the Good Neighbor Authority, we're working closely with the states, with the tribes, with other stakeholders to put together a set of templates that not only works for the Forest Service, but more importantly, it works for the state so that we can use this authority to actually increase the capacity for us to be able to get more work done working through the states, and I think this will also expand our partnership efforts. So these are the things that we've got going, the progress that we're making, and I'll tell you, I'm tremendously proud about the work that's getting done, the work we're doing with our partners and our communities, and once again, the Farm Bill, those authorities are really going to make a difference as we move forward. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I look forward to your questions.
Chief, thank you so much for your testimony. I'll start out the questioning. I was disturbed to see that the Forest Service is only preparing 7 projects using the Farm Bill Insect and Disease Treatment Authority that we provide in the Farm Bill. Now, you had talked about how, this is going to be a big year for ramping up. Are there applications for this, and I'll be real specific, I guess, are there applications for this authority in Pennsylvania? If so, why haven't we yet taken advantage of them?
Well, once again, with the passage of the Farm Bill, and then it took a while.
Check your microphone there, and thank you.
Excuse me. With the passage of the Farm Bill, and then it took some time to work with the governors to designate the areas that we could apply the insect and disease authorities. By then, we had already planned, of course, our work in 14 and also through 15. And so, well, we're only seeing, like right now, we have 9 projects, and I think that'll increase over the year. You'll really see the benefits of these new authorities come to place really in FY16. So we just we're not going to ask people to stop the projects they've done the analysis on or halfway through to be able to shift gears. And so that's one of the reasons it's taken us a little more time. Also on the Good Neighbor Authority, which I think may be probably one of the best uses of the Farm Bill authorities in your state. We're taking the time, first of all, to work with the states, and then we also have the Paperwork Reduction Act that we have to go through that does require certain processes we have to follow. And so that's taken a little more time. But the benefit of this is by sitting down with the states and actually going through what we call sand table exercises, where we actually look at the templates and go through a scenario to see how this would actually play out on the ground working together. Because of that, we're going to have a much better product than if we would have just quickly moved forward. And I look at that as probably one of the areas, especially in the state of Pennsylvania, especially with the value of the timber that we have in your state, that really, I think, will lend itself for us to find ways to work closer with the state to be able to bring more capacity to get more work done.
You have a projection, obviously 7 projects so far. Within the work, do you have a work plan with do you have a goal in terms of what you're going to be able to accomplish in the year ahead?
Well, my goals are what we're looking at, the total number of acres, the total outputs that we're putting out there. And so what we've asked each of our regions is to be able to make sure, first of all, our forest supervisors are fully aware of these authorities, how to use those, to make sure that we are using them. Because with the modifications to the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, we can now look at many of our projects, especially where we have these strong collaboratives, that often we can maybe only look at 2 alternatives in an EA or an EIS, versus in the past, we've needed to look at maybe 5 or 6 that we had to fully analyze. This is a significant improvement. Under the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, we had great success using a similar authority, but now this one allows us to use it where we have this insect and disease concern, which is on over 46 million acres.
Wanted to weigh in. You had mentioned the CFLRP have and I know one of the goals of that program was to mitigate, to avoid the wildfires. Have we been able to quantify, with just what's been done so far, the reduction of wildfire threat on those acreage?
Yes, we just put out our 5-year report on the CFLR program, and even though only half of the projects have actually had a full 5 years, but they're actually, we've been able to document the tens of thousands of acres where we reduced the hazardous fuels, also over 1.3 billion board feet that's come off of those projects. We're meeting our goals when it comes to hazardous fuels reduction. We're meeting our goals when it comes to watershed improvement on most of the areas. Outputs like saw timber and biomass. The noxious weeds, areas we wanted to reduce noxious weeds is an area we have to look at some ways to improve that. That's one of the targets that we're not quite in line with yet. But the 5-year report demonstrates the success we're having with this program, and it's one of the reasons why in our 16 budget request, we're asking for authority to expand this program. The other key part of this is that it makes a commitment for multi-year funding for us to be able to look at these large landscapes, and once again, the smallest one's 130,000 acres, but to be able to have that dedication so that the communities, the industry knows that, okay, we're going to continue to be working on these, and it's not going to be like a 1-year jump forward and then let's fall back. And so I think that's the other benefit of this program and why it's really producing the results we're seeing today.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. My time has expired, and I'm hoping maybe we'll get 2 rounds. We'll see. Pleased to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the status quo about how we're funding both prevention and fighting forest fires, that's not working. Having a fixed amount that inhibits our efforts to both then prevent and provide sufficient resources to defend them or combat wildfires during the fire season continues to be a huge problem. And I'm continuing to hear concerns that the Forest Service has managed, in addition to that, the National Forest in a manner that has left local communities, as they try to weigh in and even try to identify state or local resources to adjust that dynamic to some degree, that they're feeling very disconnected and not part of an effort to try and rectify that. I've also heard concerns that the Forest Service's wildfire prevention techniques to some degree have been ineffective and then have had some unintended consequences, which is a very serious concern for a state like New Mexico, because we are, like most of the Southwest and now the West, we're at extreme risk for wildfires, and we don't even use the terminology that we're in a severe drought. We're now in a mega drought with dire consequences for the future if we don't try to mitigate and be ahead of this issue to the highest degree that we can. Now, given that you've got limited success in a variety of reasons and not having the resources and tools and the investments that you always need, and that we continue to see our natural environment, which is like the drought, out of your control, and conditions worsen over time, I think it's really imperative today, more than ever before, that we find the right balance for managing our forests. Can you discuss with me any new or innovative ideas that you've considered that will help the Forest Service prepare for the reality of continued limited resources and worsening conditions?
Well, first, your point about how we fund wildfires, it needs to be fixed. That's the first thing, and I really think that before we can really talk about what really needs to be done on these landscapes, we have to find a solution, and I appreciate your support for the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act. There's just no question that that's something that needs to be addressed. Once again, just between FY15 and FY16, we're going to have to find another $110 million to put into fire suppression. Since 2003, it's gone up $740 million. That's been the 10-year average cost of fire suppression. And with a constrained budget, that impacts our ability to carry out all the other management responsibilities that we have, to the point that with our staff that manage the National Forest Systems, our staffing's gone down over 35%.
So do you believe that that has curtailed the development of new strategies and innovative ideas? And I might just help you in this one. I mean, I think it's very important for this subcommittee and the full committee. This would be like saying for your public safety, your firefighters and your communities, that your capital investment fund is the same as your personnel fund. So we're going to cut personnel every time we get a new fire truck. I mean, it doesn't make any sense if your goal is to protect or to combat these wildfires. We are doing this completely wrong and backwards.
Yeah, it's really the first thing that needs to be addressed. And once again, I appreciate your support. But then the other key thing that's going on today is this a level of awareness and understanding about the work that needs to be done on our national forests. The level of collaborative efforts that are going on where people are coming together and reaching conclusions about what is the right mix of benefits under this concept of multiple use to provide for wildlife, for recreation, of course, water, and for fisheries. And at the same time, there's a need for us to remove more biomass. And so that's why we've gone to great lengths to be able to identify the number of acres we need to actually be restoring.
And as you do that, I don't mean to interrupt, Chief, I appreciate it, I'm running out of time, but it would be great if maybe you could provide the committee a kind of a list of those partners and communities where you think we identified those best practices, because that would be useful to us. And then I'm going to, with my last few seconds, make a pitch that we're hoping that we can have a better relationship with your office as we work to deal with the civil rights report related to discrimination for minority farmers and their access to forest lands and forest services. So that would be really helpful to continue that dialogue and have access to responses about that internal civil rights report.
We'll be glad to provide you with a list of the various communities that we're working very closely with, along with the ones that are actually providing financial resources to be able to invest in making an improvement in their forests.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Thanks, the gentlelady. Now, please recognize Dr. Benechek from Michigan for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Tewell, thanks for being here. I've got a couple of questions. You know, the northern long-eared bat's been recently listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, so there's an interim management rule in place with a comment period open until July. How is your agency working to provide information to those who work the forests to ensure that they have everything under control and everything they need to comply with the new listing?
Well, first of all, we're working very closely with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service so that they understand the things we are doing on the landscape, the way that I believe that healthy forests are also good for bat populations. And then at the same time, our staff has looked at these interim procedures and have gone through all the sales that we currently have, and we feel that we can, with some very minor modifications, be able to ensure all of our projects that are lined up this year will be able to go forward. And then in the future, I think, at least where we're at right now, there may be some additional impacts we have to do through the consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service, and we'll have to adjust some of the operational periods of when the loggers are out in the woods in a few cases. But everything I'm seeing right now is that we're going to be able to work with this and to be able to provide, the quality habitat for bats, minimize disturbance, but at the same time, carry out the work that needs to be done to restore these forests.
Right. Okay. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that, because people are quite concerned in Michigan about the impact of this species. I have another question about the Michigan DNR apparently met with the Forest Service last month in Wisconsin to assess how to implement this good neighbor authority in our neighborhood. And I understand that coming out of the exercise, you committed to allowing funds received to be used to pay for the work that states conduct under this authority, as we envisioned in the Farm Bill. So I just want to thank you for your commitment to implement this good neighbor authority in this manner. And I know that states like Michigan are eager to help the Forest Service fully implement this forest plan. Can you confirm to me that you'll be finalizing the program shortly so that states can implement, maybe even this summer?
Yes, we're working to complete the requirements of the Paperwork Reduction Act and then submit the templates in for approval. It's my understanding where we need to be is that the revenue, the receipts from these Good Neighbor Authority agreements can be managed by the states in a program so we can continue to fund restoration work. I see this as one of the many benefits of this authority is that they'll be able to retain these receipts through these agreements and then invest in more restoration work on the forests.
Well, I'm trying to, when can this start happening, do you think? I mean, will it happen this year? I mean, during this cutting season?
I'm hopeful that states like your state and maybe with Wisconsin and a few other states that have really kind of leaned into this, that we'll be able to actually move forward with projects later this year to be able to demonstrate the benefits of this. And I think it's a fair expectation. We need a few states to kind of step forward and to be able to demonstrate what can be done through this, and I think that'll help other states, probably come on board. So we're actually looking, towards your state to be one that'll help us.
Well, good luck with that, and I appreciate anything you can do to keep me informed as to how things are going with that, because as you may know, I had some of the forest supervisors in the office here yesterday and trying to proceed with learning more about this program and how it moves forward. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and now please recognize Congresswoman Dobain for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief Tidwell, for being here with us today. One thing I hear often from our rural and forested communities is a concern that the Forest Service staff, jobs, and offices continue to move further away from the rural areas that they represent and impact. More and more we see fewer agency boots on the ground, fewer personnel interacting with the communities that are most impacted by their actions. And when personnel live outside of the district and work remotely 40 or 50 miles from the forest, they have less knowledge about what's happening in the woods that they're supposed to be managing and in kind of what's happening in the communities as well. The communities also lose the diversity of their community and suffer economic impacts when folks live and work elsewhere. And we have some great Forest Service staff in our communities in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie Forest in particular. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and comments on this issue, which is a growing disconnect, and I think across our country.
Well, I share your concern. It's one of our benefits, I think, of our agency being decentralized and where we have decisions made at the lowest level that closest to the communities. And every time, it's been the history of the agency of consolidations, but we go to great lengths to try to minimize those. But as I mentioned earlier, the impact of paying for fire suppression, and this has occurred over time. It hasn't happened in just a couple of years, but over the last really 15 years, has really had a devastating effect on our staffing levels. And it's resulted in where we've had to consolidate more and more offices, at the same time trying to be able to keep our presence in communities. We go to great lengths that as each time there's a reduction, under my watch, I've made sure that all levels, the Washington office also goes down. We've just completed some efficiency works where we reduced over $100 million out of our fixed costs to do everything we can to make sure we can, fund the staff we have out in the field. But this is just another, I think, a reason why we need to find a solution to the fire suppression issue, and I appreciate your support on that. But we're going to go to great lengths to try to keep our presence in all these communities, and even I'd much rather see a reduction at the other level of the organization, and at the same time be able to maintain the folks that are out there in the communities, the people that are out, doing the work on the ground, and so that's going to continue to be my focus.
Thank you. In terms of fire funding, I totally agree and understand we need to have a better solution with that. And in fact, in Washington State, last summer's fire season included the largest wildfire in our state's history. And I know University of Washington estimates that, wildfires in the Pacific Northwest will nearly double by the 2020s and nearly triple by the 2040s. as a result of climate change. And so we have a tough road ahead of us if we don't do a better job of making sure that we have funding available too. And it impacts trail maintenance and other types of things that are so important to folks being able to enjoy the forest. One other question I wanted to ask you was, some in the timber industry and in our communities have begun to explore cross-laminated timber.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could comment on the usefulness of this still developing technology and where you see its place in forestry and in the timber industry in the future.
Well, the cross-laminated timbers, which our Forest Products Lab worked to develop and pass all the tests, one of the benefits of this, this type of a product is that we'll be able to, we're looking at being able to expand commercial buildings. Right now in this country, we're pretty well limited to about 4 stories at the most using wood. But with cross-laminated timbers, it has the strength, it meets all the heat-resistant standards in this country, where we could be using buildings like going 8 to 9 stories easily. And we actually have, the Secretary commissioned a competition to get some architectural firms working with engineering firms to actually compete to see who would build a couple of examples for us. And we're actually working with Canada on this. They're also interested in it too. So we have the first mill is going to be actually, I think, be in production by the 3rd quarter of this year in Oregon to actually start to produce this. But it's another benefit of being able to use the small diameter material. We have markets for the saw logs, but there's so much of the smaller material needs to be removed to reduce hazardous fuels, etc. And these cross-laminated timbers, they take this smaller material and they can use that to be able then to construct, beams, 30, 40 feet long. They're actually stronger than, say, natural wood is. And so I'm very optimistic that as soon as we are able to get some folks to build some buildings with this, that we'll be able to expand this market and be able to create another use, especially for the smaller diameter material.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My time's expired. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentlelady. Now, please recognize the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Chief, for coming and appearing before the subcommittee today. My former role in life was in the construction industry, and we did use a lot of laminated timber for large spans in gymnasiums and other facilities with, which created great beauty in these facilities. And so look forward to continuing working with you and our industry on those types of applications. In my home state of Georgia, we have over 24 million acres in private forests, which I'm told is the most of any state in the nation. And I meet and have since been in Congress now for a little over 4 months, and we've met with a number of our timber folks. And, they've questioned, and I guess the first thing I should say is you've talked about funding today, but they've questioned the U.S. Forest Service management practices, which a lot of those management practices deal with preventing the outbreak of a fire. Are we where we need to be with the extent of management practices in the Forest Service to prevent these fires?
Well, the treatments that we're putting on the landscape are producing the results we're looking for. But what we need to do is expand, accelerate the number of acres we're treating. That's where we really need to put the effort. We've done studies on our projects that are designed to reduce the threat of wildfire. And we've looked at 2,000 cases, and over 90% of those 2,000 cases, we've been able to produce the results to reduce the severity of wildfire. For that 10% that is not, in most of those cases, the problem's been that the project wasn't large enough. That's the thing that's just changed with the fire activity that we're seeing today, the fire behavior we're seeing today. We have to be looking at much larger areas. And so it used to be folks would look at maybe a 100-yard 300 feet clearing was enough to stop these fires. But when we're looking at changing fire behavior, we got to be looking at thousands to maybe 10,000 acres at a time to reduce the amount of fuel on that landscape to change the severity. So that's the area that we want to continue to work on. So what we're doing is producing results. We just need to get more of it done.
All right. Do you consult with the private industry as far as the techniques that we're using to prevent these fires? Because, again, you know, fire is a problem for our private industry folks as well.
We do consult and work closely with them. In fact, we rely on the industry, because without the industry,
That's good.
we couldn't do the work that
Good.
needs to be done.
The other thing that's we've got going on in our district, which is near the Port of Savannah, is the new wood pellet
Yes.
industry. Are we doing what we need to do to promote that industry as far as marketing these pellets to the rest of the world?
We are, but there's a need for more, and I'd start with research. We've done research over the years to be able to look at pellets, about how to increase the BTUs in a pellet, also to look at how pellets are more durable, so especially if we're shipping them on barges across the Atlantic. And so we need to continue that work. Then the other challenge that we have is to be able to, and what we're doing, the Forest Service is working with the states and with the industry to be able to answer the question around sustainability. We've been questioned that, especially with the pellet production there in the southeast, is that truly sustainable forestry? And we're going to work with the states and with the industry to be able to demonstrate that, so our European markets, they can be satisfied that, yes, this is sustainable forestry, and that's one of the things that we're working on right now to make sure that we don't lose that very key market.
Well, I can help you with that sustainable question, because we got a lot of folks, a lot of friends in that business, and I think they can help you get answers to those questions. Thank you, Chief, and with that, I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Now please recognize the gentlelady from Arizona for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, it's nice to see you here today, and following along the line of sustainability. I was born in the timber town of McNary, Arizona. In fact, I've spent most of my life living in the mountain forests of Arizona, and I've seen the change in wildfire. And of course, about this time of year, we become very concerned about the horrific wildfires that we've had to endure in the last few years. And so I was happy to see in your written testimony that you acknowledged the Forest Restoration Project, which is an innovative, collaborative approach to addressing forest health and bringing back the timber industry. Recently, the record of decision was signed on April 17th for the initial environmental impact statement. But there have been stumbles along the way, as you know, and I just wanted to reference a recent editorial from the Arizona Republic. And Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, I'd like to have it added to the record. It addresses some of the changes and that this is going to, the good things that are going to happen out of this, but also some of the challenges that we face.
Without objection.
Thank you. And so my question to you, Chief, is do you think Good Earth Power, who now has the contract, will be able to perform the task orders that have been issued in the time frame of the task orders, and what accountability will there be for them?
Well, our staff is, just this past week, been meeting with Good Earth, to ask these questions. And it was, I think, a tremendous success to be able to get this EIS completed. I cannot thank the partners, the communities enough that have worked so closely with us to be able to do this kind of historic document. But now is the time to go to work. And so I'm cautiously optimistic. There's task orders that have been issued, and we will hold Good Earth accountable like we do all of our contractors. And at the same time, because of the size of this EIS, there is more work now it's been approved than is required with Good Earth's contract. So we're also going to be moving forward with issuing task orders to other purchasers in that area too, so that not only Good Earth can be moving forward, but we can also get some more work done. I also want to You know, the reason we're able to do this, it goes back to the work that was done under the previous stewardship contract, where we treated over 300,000 acres in your state to be able to demonstrate not only the benefit of this type of treatment, but to build the trust in the community. It's just, I think, another example of where, through these collaborative efforts, we can bring people together and then take on, you know, doing an EIS that covers over 565,000 acres with one document. By doing this, at a minimum, it probably eliminates anywhere from 30 to over 50 EAs and EISs that we normally would have done to be able to do that same type of work. And so it's essential that this is successful, and we're going to work very closely with Good Earth, and everything they've told us is that things look very good as we move forward.
Well, thank you for that, and this is very important to my office, and so we continue to have our discussions with the stakeholders and with Good Earth. We'll be watching for those logging trucks on the highways, you know, in the next month or so. And it's too bad. I mean, one of the problems has been we lost a generation of loggers and timber people in Arizona, and that's been an additional challenge. So I'd like to close with inviting you to come visit my district in the next few months. We'd love to be on the ground with you and go to some of those sites. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Please recognize the gentlelady from New Hampshire for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Ranking Member Lujan Grisham, and thank you to Chief Tidwell for being with us today. We appreciate the time. I'm very grateful for the work that you do, and to your Forest Service staff in New Hampshire and the work that we are focused on. One of the issues, though, is that I want to share some concerns with you, and we may have to leave for a vote soon, so I'm going to just cut to the chase, if you'll. I'm usually much more polite. So the question, this is just in some recent conversations. I meet with my timber and lumber and home landowners frequently, and they were expressing a great deal of frustration about the forest management plans were not living up to their goals. And as I was listening to them, it just felt like a disconnect. You know, sometimes around here, you'll get one version from one group and another version from another. But it seemed that the forest management plans didn't necessarily reflect the reality of what is happening or what frankly could happen on the ground. And so I realized that there are budgetary and other constraints keeping the Forest Service from getting closer to meeting the timber harvest goals. But my concern is a little bit different. I'd love your response to it. I'm wondering if whether the forest management plans aren't based on formulas or guidelines that don't take into the reality on the ground, location, ease of access, species distribution, land use goals, and that really I'm an attorney, we call it a meeting of the minds, that we don't have a meeting of the minds laid out in that plan, and then we end up with this divergent expectations and people's goals are not being met. Could you comment? And is there anything that we could do to get people closer to actually having an understanding of the amount of timber that we can harvest from the land in a sustainable way?
Well, one of the things we need to do is to revise many of our forest plans. There's over like 65 forest plans that are way out of date. And part of that is that when we went through the first phase of planning, we looked at kind of like everything we wanted to do, and it was like there was no budget constraints, and we would actually lay out expectations about all the work that needed to be done, and we had a caveat in all of them that said, based on availability of budgets. Well, that all got kind of lost. And so as we go through with our new planning rule, one of the things we made the change is we wanted to talk about what realistic expectations, what needs to be done and what it's going to take to be able to do that, and to be able to project with some certainty the level of outputs that are going to be produced year in, year out, based on some realities, so that industry can use that to be able to make business decisions, individuals can make that to make business decisions, whether it's with recreational businesses or whether it's with timber or whatever. So, that's part of it. But that being said, your forest, like all the other states that are represented here today, there's a need for us to be doing more work there. In New Hampshire, I have to be careful when I use the term restoration because they understand what that means from when these forests were acquired, back in the early 1900s. They understand restoration and the importance
100 years
of that.
ago, we almost lost the forest completely, so we know.
You get that.
Yeah.
But there's a need for us to do more. And in your state, again, is a place where I'm talking with the forest supervisor. He feels that the good neighbor authorities are going to be an opportunity for him to bring some additional capacity by working with the states and with partners to be able to actually get more of that work done to produce that mix of benefits, which includes a need for increased timber harvest on your forest to be able to maintain that health, keep the recreational settings, which are so important to your state and on that forest, but at the same time be able to maintain forest health, forest resiliency.
Well, thank you, and I want to extend my own invitation. You could do a East Coast, West Coast tour, but we'd love to have you to New Hampshire. And just to acknowledge the comment from my colleague from the South, bioenergy, chips and pellets, it's a big part of our landscape now, and we want to create jobs, we want to have sustainable forests, but we want to make sure that we're getting what we can out of the forest for energy and all other purposes. So thank you very much. I appreciate your help, and thank you. I'll yield back.
Thanks, young lady. Just want to make members aware, and in our second panel, I misspoke. We unfortunately had an unanticipated second procedural vote. There's about 9 minutes, 8 minutes on the clock, so we have some time. And so we're going to continue to proceed here. And please recognize the gentleman from Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a real quick question, because I noticed in your written testimony, and when we were looking that over, and you may not know the answer to this, but if you can find it out, one of the things you talked about was a specific project. It was the Kincaid-Reed Creek project, and I'm very, very familiar with that. As a matter of fact, I was around when the lake was. Well, I say that. I was around driving with my grandfather in a truck when the dam was built for that, okay? And when it was built, we knew that the watershed was a very quick watershed. And it is a very deep lake, but the project that you worked on is a silting on the north end. Are you familiar enough with the project? Because what I want to ask, and if I can't get that answer today, I'd like to get it. I know you're working with the different groups to try to stop the silting from coming in. Is it to the point that you have slowed it enough, and if it's not slowed enough, can it be slowed enough that then we can dredge that north end and take the depth of that particular water reservoir back to where it was, so that we know that the water's good now, but we need to make sure that we get it back down to the depth, and I didn't know if we were to that point or not.
I'll have to get back to you on that. I do know that we're implementing some additional projects this year. We've approved the funding, working with NRCS and some other partners up there. So they're doing some more stabilization work to reduce the sediment. So I'll get back to you about when we'll be to that point where the dredging can occur. But we are moving forward with some additional projects this year.
Yeah, that particular one I do want to compliment on, because we knew when the lake was built, the conversations was the watershed was so fast. Matter of fact, the engineers of the lake told my grandfather at the time, they said, someone said, how long do you think it'll take the lake to fill? And they said, well, it'll take about 5 years. And he said, it'll fill this spring. And it did. It did. That's how fast of a shed it is. So that's and everything from farming practices to what the Forestry Service has done as well. And so thank you. And just if you can let me know, thank you.
Okay, we'll do that.
You're back?
Gentleman, Jill's back, yeah.
All right. I want to take the opportunity to ask an additional question and provide that opportunity to other members. If you're comfortable, just keep an eye on the time clock. That's all I would ask in terms of getting in for votes. Chief, you referred to, and it seemed you put a lot of value in terms of the tool that retain receipts for restorative work has had. And I think the numbers show that out. And I do appreciate the trend overall in harvesting, but I really want to focus in on the green stick. I want to focus in on, and that's not, and the restorative has an economic benefit, there's no doubt about it, in terms of jobs, local jobs on those projects, but really the lifeblood of our, economically, of our communities, where we have national forests, is in just good timber harvesting. And you know that. Better than I do. And even on the Allegheny, we've gone, when and these are general numbers, I looked at them yesterday. When I was first elected, my first term was serving a ranking member with Mr. Holden, who was chair. We were somewhere around 13 million board feet total. And it has gone up, the total cuts have gone up every year. And we're at 30 million board feet, 38 million this past year, and I think we're somewhere around 14 million just in the first quarter this year. But my concern is, of last year's number of 38 million board feet, which is going the right direction, I think there were only about 12 million board feet, 12 to 13 million, that actually were green stick. They were actually the kind of timber harvesting that makes big differences economically and on a larger landscape perspective. So if that is the case, and I know that the President's plan, within your testimony, you talked about how the plan to go from 2.9 billion board feet to 3.2 board feet, and I know that's addressing wildfires and there's issues out there, but my concern is, we got to do balanced here, because we're leaving our rural communities behind, and we're just crushing them. We have schools that had received hundreds of thousands are down to like maybe 80,000. I mean, it's just, it's not good. So my question is, if retain receipts, and we don't give you the authority to do that with, just on restorative is all we do now. We don't do it on the green stick. I don't know if there's a better way to describe that. That's the words I use. It's interesting. We do provide the Corps of Engineers authority to retain, to have retained receipts for green stick harvesting. And so we have a precedent, but we've not done that for our Forest Service, to keep that, some of that, at least part of that money on the forest, so that we're paving the way to more good productive timbering that helps everybody. It helps our national forests, obviously, but it also helps our rural communities. So I wanted to get your response to that. If retained receipts was a good thing for restorative, you see a reason why that, and this authority would have to come from Congress, obviously. You don't have that today, but you see that, would that be a tool that would be helpful? It's obviously helped restorative harvesting, timbering increase significantly.
Well, I think if you look at the work we've done with stewardship contracts, where we have the ability to, to retain those receipts and be able to get more work done, is an example of, some of the benefits of that. You mentioned, like our salvage sales, where we're able to kind of retain the receipts off the salvage, to have a salvage sale fund to be able to do that work. A lot of our funds from our green timber sales, I mean, part of it goes into the KV fund to be able to do the work to restore, replant the forest where we need to do that. Part of it goes into the 25% fund that goes into secure rural schools. And so, there's definitely benefits.
But all those pass ins, they go back to the Black Hole of Washington, and then come back out to the communities. Or to the states first.
Yeah, that's one.
And to the communities.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, so I think if you look at what we've been doing with stewardship contracting and the level of support, that when we do a project with stewardship contracting, overall we just have generally more support for the work, because we do a mix of work. We're able to retain the receipts to be able to do the restoration work. With the Good Neighbor Authority, we'll be able to do something similar with those agreements with the state, to be able to demonstrate how we can do that to reinvest. So those are just a couple of examples of, I think, to answer your question.
Okay. I see retained receipts as one of the things we need to be looking at, so that we're reinvesting.
If I might.
I recognize the ranking member.
And because we're voting, I don't think that you're going to have an opportunity to respond, so I apologize. But maybe you could get back again to the committee in my office, and recognizing that the federal government's got a responsibility to support Indian nations to help maintain healthy forest, and that's not something that falls to you directly. The reality is that in spite of about a $2.82 per acre versus $8.57 an acre that you receive at USDA, some of those tribes are able to maintain actually healthier forests than their nearby neighbors in those states, even given that funding disparity. I think the disparity is wrong, and I think that we ought, if we care about investing in healthy management of our forests, we have to invest in our tribal partners. And given that, I'd love for you to talk to me about what you could do to create those collaborations, those partnerships, to weigh in, to make sure that tribes have every potential resource benefit aspect collaboration. And then I think it's all of our responsibility to make sure that they have the resources that they need to do their jobs effectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is part of our responsibility to be able to work with the tribes, not only to ensure protection of their cultural, spiritual values, but at the same time, when it comes to forest health. And we have many projects where we're working together collaboratively in your state. I think it's the Pueblo of Isleta is one example where we have a CFLR project we're working.
Zuni and Hamas, and some of those work, and some of those haven't quite been as effective, and some of those relationships may not be as strong and sound as they ought to be, quite frankly.
Well, I think those are examples of the more work that we need to do. And it's one of the things we're trying to work very closely with the tribes. Also, we're doing some work with the Mescaleros right now to be able to help them to get their mill retooled and back up. But I'd be glad to provide you with a list of the things that we're doing, and then even more importantly, the things that we're moving forward on, where we recognize we need to be doing more to work closer with our tribes.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Generally yields back. We are going to go for votes. We will reconvene immediately after this vote. We'll come right back. Yeah, so the committee stands in recess subject to the call of the chair. All right, this subcommittee meeting for the purpose of a hearing for the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry is reconvened. And once again, I apologize for the unanticipated interruption. I'm pleased to welcome our second panel of witnesses to the table. Ms. Sue Swanson, Executive Director of the Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group from Kane, Pennsylvania. She is a timber family with her husband, working within the industry, and her just really appreciate your leadership on this issue for a long time, and we'll put it that way. And also, we're joined by Ms. Becky Humphreys, Chief Conservation Officer of the National Wild Turkey Federation from Edgefield, South Carolina. And I'll yield to the ranking member for purpose of introduction of a proud New Mexico resident.
Mr. Chairman, that's very kind, and I was going to thank Ms. McCarthy, Laura McCarthy, who's the director of the conservation programs at the Nature Conservancy in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which unfortunately is not in my district, but where I grew up, and has had great influence on many projects, not only in my district, but the health of so many issues and forests and conservation issues across the state. And I just want to thank you for your work with my office, and I'm very gratified that you're here today. Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Well, we'll proceed. Ms. Swanson, go ahead and proceed with your 5 minutes of testimony whenever you're ready.
Jeez, should have known. And the Federal Forest Resource Coalition. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about our national forest, which is the Allegheny. The Alleghenies is our largest landownership block in our region at 513,000 acres, which is really small compared to a lot of your national forests. But the management of that forest is vital for the future of the forest products industry. The Allegheny, like many national forests, is not really contributing to where we would like it, and able to support our local economy and meet the goals that are actually laid out in our forest plan. After years of timber sale litigation, the plan actually set some very modest goals. For example, the goal for regeneration harvest is 1,700 to 2,500 acres per year. And in the first 6 years of implementation, the forest has only averaged 500 acres of regeneration harvest. So you can see that that isn't going to get us where we need to go. And the result of that is we have very much less early succession forests than what we would like to have. Over the last 5 years, timber outputs from the forest have declined by about 11%. And in addition to that, 40% of our outputs is in lower value timber rather than the valuable saw timber that drives our forest products economy. Pennsylvania is known for its high-quality hardwoods, and the Allegheny has always been in the center of that, at least it has in the past. It seems to us that the problems are sort of twofold, probably more than that, but I'm going to speak to two. Initially, when the forest draws up plans to work on projects, and they would actually meet forest plan objectives. Then, after lengthy NEPA and surveys, layer upon layer, the projects are actually diminished. And in some cases, in the end, they don't actually meet the objectives that were laid out in the first place. And generally, they have marginal economic value for timber producers. And the goal of a diverse, healthy forest ecosystem is often compromised. Second, I think the forest, because of litigation, has decided the best approach to management is to try to develop projects that would draw no objections. This tendency to kind of assume that collaboration must mean unanimous gives management groups power over them, whether they appeal or not. And we've actually seen where our forest didn't use the new authority that they were given under the insect and disease designation. We would like to see them do that. We have hemlock woolly adelgid in our state. We have the emerald ash beetle, and that would have been, we would have liked to have seen them use it on those things, and we hope that they will. But I think they're a little afraid to be the first one in the East to actually use that. At the end of the day, we have an aging forest that's starting to show serious signs of decline. Instead of regeneration, commercially valuable species, we're focusing on thinning older stands. You know, we talk about, professional foresters talk about the need to continue that, to change the stand composition. It's like prescribing vigorous exercise to nursing home residents. Something's probably going to happen, but I don't know if it'll be good. In my written testimony, we made some recommendations about further legislation. The Farm Bill and the things that you have done, we really appreciate, but I think it does encourage collaboration, it expedites analysis, and it reduces gridlock, but the real need is to clarify the management mandate on national forests. Go beyond giving them permission to manage and allow them to start providing direction for them to manage. I'd like to see, you know, maybe a trust approach to relatively small portions of the national forest designated for timber production. It would be a good starting point. Let's manage those areas that we really are supposed to manage. FFRC and AHUG really stand ready to help the Forest Service and you to do that. We'd like to find a better way.
Thank you, Ms. Swanson. Appreciate testimony. Ms. Humphreys, pleased to recognize you now for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. The National Wild Turkey Federation applauds the committee's focus on active forest management. We have 230,000 members across the country and active chapters in each and every state of this country. With the successful restoration of the wild turkey across its range, we have refocused our efforts and are working on Save the Habitat, Save the Hunt initiative. This initiative is really geared at making sure that we're doing active forest management and helping and improve that upland habitat that's so important for wild turkeys as well as of other host of species, and also saving our hunting heritage that is so important. Wildlife managers and our wildlife biologists consider active management the best solution to meet habitat requirements of the largest variety of species and create young forest habitat that provide for food, nesting habitat, and hiding places for wildlife. Throughout the United States, we're losing the diversity at a landscape level scale, threatening habitat for species like the golden-winged warbler, the New England cottontail, the gopher tortoise, the red-cockaded woodpecker, and many, many other species. We have a number of examples, but I'll give you just three of them as we talk today. On the Oconee National Forest and Piedmont National Wildlife Refuge in Georgia, we and the U.S. Forest Service have actively managed over 21,000 acres of loblolly pine habitat to increase pine savanna and young forest habitat for endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. It's resulted in a 27% increase in potential breeding pairs on that, as well as population increases for the southern flying squirrel, the bobwhite quail, the wild turkey, and a variety of migratory songbirds. The management of healthy forests is made economically viable by the harvest and sale of forest products, including timber, and timber sales offset the cost of reforestation, invasive species control, prescribed fire, and timber stand improvements. Federal lands play a really vital role in maintaining healthy forests in that they're resilient to the threats at this landscape level. Federal timber management keeps the mills open, it brings stability to the supply and demand market, and it provides local jobs. We need those. Active management of our federal forests reduces devastating wildfires. It reduces insect and forest diseases before those diseases can spread to adjacent state lands and private forest lands, and it increases forest health and diversity. We really appreciate the authorities that have been granted in recent years by the Agriculture Committee to address forest health. The 2014 Farm Bill, as has been mentioned, has granted permanent authorization of stewardship contracting and good neighbor authority. It's also established insect and disease area designations to the existing Wyden Amendment and cooperative forest landscape restoration programs. These authorities can lead to healthier forests if they're implemented properly. The National Wild Turkey Federation has been a leader in stewardship contracting program, and we've partnered with the U.S. Forest Service on 81 forest stewardship projects in the last decade. A couple of these examples. In New Mexico, we worked on the Cibola National Forest, and it was part of the Blue Water Stewardship Agreement. The National Wild Turkey Federation and our partners, including the Mount Taylor Machine Sawmill, have provided matching funds to the project, which has expanded a number of treated acres by over 20% in that particular area. The work makes the forest healthier. It supports the small community of Milan, New Mexico. And another example, we also worked with Land Between the Lakes, National Recreation Area in Kentucky and Tennessee. Following a damaging ice storm, we restored access to over 170,000 acres by facilitating multiple logging contracts to open roads and clean up debris, and our stewardship efforts continue to work on almost 6,000 acres each and every year there. Despite all this, we need to move forward and have more progress made on active management. So I offered the following suggestions. Number one, we need to help the agencies expand collaborative efforts in the early stages of the process. And that means talking about the benefits of active management needed to carry out those in order to get the desired future condition. It needs to start at the beginning, not at the end, as was mentioned. We need to work at the landscape level to achieve broad benefits, and that means working across ownership patterns, not only the various forest federal agencies, but also the state agencies and local. We need to solve the fire funding program, which has been brought up numerous times today. The situation currently is just unacceptable. We need to encourage federal agencies to use all available tools and all available authorities, and that includes the use of categorical exclusions. I'd like to close by saying the committee has done a great work. We stand ready to help both the National Forest System and this committee as we move forward. and look to active management to make our forest healthier and sustainable in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Humphries, for your testimony. I'm now pleased to recognize Ms. McCarthy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lujan Grissom. I'm Laura McCarthy with the Nature Conservancy in New Mexico, and I really appreciate this opportunity to share why National Forest Management is so important to the people in my state and give a little bit of a Western perspective. The reason national forests are so important is water, and I'm going to explain why with a few slides. You can see up here, this is the fire scene nobody wants to see looming over their town, but unfortunately for us, in 2011, that's what we were greeted with. What's most important about that fire is what it left behind. This image is taken in Bland Canyon, and we ended up with a 30,000-acre hole that looked like this with nothing living in it. This is out of category kind of severity and intensity of fire. This will start automatically. It should be a video that's going to show you what happens when it rains on a burned area. This is actually a debris flow that came out of that burned area that I showed in the previous slide, and it happened after 2 very average afternoon thunderstorms about 6 weeks after the fire. It took 20 minutes for the water to get out of the headwaters down into the valley. You can see an apple orchard there, and you can see barriers that the Army Corps of Engineers set up expecting a volume of flow substantially less than what actually occurred. This kind of flooding keeps happening. It's now 4 years later, and we are still having events that are depositing sediment into our river. This is property damage after that flood. And this is where that canyon comes into the Rio Grande, and you can see a big mass of sediment that the Army Corps of Engineers estimates is 70 feet deep. So we have mass movement of sediment, literally the soil, the lifeblood, out of the headwaters down into the river, and this river carries water that supplies drinking water for half of our state's population and irrigates the incredibly productive farmland in the Rio Grande Valley. So it's very significant to us. This is the reservoir that's half a mile down from the confluence of Bland Canyon and the Rio Grande, and this was taken on the day after the flood. You can see what the reservoir looked like. The water samples are not from the reservoir, they're from another river that was affected by the same fire. So now the solution. The science is really clear. We need to accelerate the pace and scale of restoration, and we want to really compliment the Forest Service and the administration for putting a focus on accelerating the pace and scale of restoration. You can't stop a fire from growing 43,000 acres in less than a day if all you can treat is 3,000 acres a year. We need to scale up, and the Forest Service can't do it alone. That flood that I showed crossed many jurisdictions, and so must our solution. So we need to involve the Interstate Stream Commission, which manages the Rio Grande. We need to involve the federal agencies that manage water. What we've done in New Mexico is create a new partnership that we call the Rio Grande Water Fund, and it's much like many other collaboratives. What I think is unique, though, is the way in which we've involved the business community. We went to them, we started with the Chamber of Commerce in Albuquerque, we asked them if they were concerned about water security, and they responded really positively. So we have a very diverse partnership. We are leveraging funding from the business sector, also from the private sector in the philanthropy world, and the Lohr Foundation is here with me today because of the significant investment they've made as a catalyst for bringing other funding solutions to the table to leverage the federal dollars. Let me conclude with one policy priority. This is the compelling need for this Congress, in my opinion, and in the Nature Conservancy's view, and that is to provide a new fire suppression funding mechanism. It's been talked about by several of you today. Disaster cap adjustment is absolutely essential. If you are able, as a Congress, to solve that problem then I think the rest of the pieces are going to fall into place. It is the 800-pound gorilla. And we urge you to take action. We appreciate your leadership and look forward to being able to work constructively on the other forest management issues once the fire funding problem is solved.
Ms. McCarthy, thank you very much, and thanks for the very disturbing videos. Well, that really tell that lays it right out there. I'm going to start with Ms. Swanson. I'll take the liberty of starting 5 minutes of questions. And so I wanted to go to your testimony where you talk about, just I'll read part of your testimony. Moreover, we found that residual trees in these thin stands wind up producing damaged wood with imperfections in the appearance grade lumber that our industry relies on. And my question, in my opening statement, I made reference, at least in my mind, it's kind of a triangle to have healthy forests and healthy rural communities. It is about green timber harvesting. There's no doubt about it. And there's a role within harvesting for restorative to stay ahead of problems. But it's also about influencing the best we can the market, the timber market. And we've got some trade agreements we're working on. I think we need to be vigilant. I encourage members of this subcommittee to be vigilant with those to make sure that that our timber products or forest products are well positioned in those trade agreements. But then there's other things in terms of market. But then there's also value and being concerned. And that's a little tougher. And there's not a lot of things we can do sometimes because it's kind of subjective to the whims of the consumer. But your statement actually speaks to something, we're not proper, and so my question for you, it appears you're saying that, we've got these great cherry trees. But if we do not, and other species are probably in the same scope of things, that there is a prime time and a pastime for harvesting. And so can you speak to the situations where we maybe, because we're not as aggressive or not fulfilling our harvesting for a host of reasons, that these trees that are owned by the taxpayers and that are resources that are supposed to be, the taxpayers will benefit financially from, can you speak to what happens on value when we don't timber?
There have been some instances where they've gone in and thinned stands that are like 90 years old, and they actually ended up doing more harm to the residual trees that were left than if they would have harvested properly. And so I think that you do create a situation where you're not getting the best value of the trees. So you do have to be conscious of that. And I think that our state forests and our local forest products industry has stopped doing that, in fact. And they've gone right to a regeneration harvest at a certain level. The Forest Service has been slower to adapt to that. Now, they are starting to, but it really has made a big difference in the quality of the timber that's coming off of some of those sales. So I do think that you have to be really aware of what you're doing and the choices that you make, because really the cherry market is high value.
Yeah, thank you. My next question actually is for Ms. Humphreys, Ms. McCarthy, and it references some of the points that you have both made. Ms. Humphreys, in your testimony, you talk about wildlife managers consider active management the best solution to meet habitat requirements for the largest variety of species. And then, obviously, in terms of water quality, Ms. McCarthy, you've made that implication as well with what you presented. And so I guess what I'm hearing is, that both other animals, critters, birds and animals, mammals, as well as water quality can be significantly negatively impacted when we don't have active management. And so I'd like to speak to that, and I guess I'm going into a dangerous area probably for me, but it's what I'm passionate about is how does that speak for wilderness areas where we don't touch it at all in terms of active management, and yet these things will all be subject to these implications.
Well, I'll take a crack at the first part of this and leave you to the second part of this. But first of all, like anything, having diversity on the landscape provides more resiliency. And unfortunately, as we have backed off in recent decades on active management, what has happened is a lot of our forests have aged. We've had increasing fuel loads, and because of that, we're not getting the diversity in that younger forest type in there. That is good for a wealth, that younger forest is good for a wealth of species out there, and I think people failed to recognize that in the early days following kind of the change of pendulum swing in active management. Certainly with that, I won't tell you that there's no place for wilderness, but I do think that we need to think very carefully in terms of when we say no management at all, what that really means.
Okay.
We live in a global landscape. I happened to live, at the time, I was the director with emerald ash borer, I hate to admit it, but in Michigan. And, that pest came in from overseas. It spread much further than we ever expected when we first detected that. And it affects situations where we don't have the ability to just say hands off, we're gonna let it go. And because when we do that, we have devastating results and lack of ash across much of the Midwest at this point. So I think it's really important to recognize that there needs to be active management at various stages, but we really need to change the talk into desired future outcomes of that forest, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. McCarthy?
Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, it's a good question. And Albuquerque, where I live, has a beautiful mountain range right outside of it, and most of it is wilderness. So I think about this question a lot. The Wilderness Act and the agency implementation policies do allow for limited active management for the purpose of maintaining the ecological characteristics of the wilderness area. And in my experience, where the scientific information is very clear about what those ecological characteristics are, there is the possibility of active management, and that does happen in the national parks, for example. I believe that the consensus around active management, now I'm not talking about wilderness in this case, but just when I look across New Mexico at where people are now, the level of understanding of our public about the need for active management has grown tremendously in the last decade, and it's created a window of opportunity for the Forest Service, I believe, to really make good on that acceleration if we can remove some of the barriers, because the social license is finally there.
All right. Thank you very much. My time has long expired, so I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member for as much time as she consumes.
That is a very dangerous path for you to go down, but I accept. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Laura, and I shouldn't be so familiar, but she's quite an icon, not only in the state, but in my community. And Ms. McCarthy, I really want to continue on that dialogue that we've got social license to really think about what we ought to be doing. And I don't want to minimize, because I want to go back to that we really don't have a resources funding vehicle so that we're doing management and conservation in a productive way, and it lends itself and leads to these real problems that we have with fire prevention and then the ability to respond productively, not just to put the fire out, but as you more than ably described, using those visuals, that for years to come, there are significant problems that we never, including Army Corps, FEMA, and everybody else who's responsible and responds to these issues, that the amount of money that we're spending on the back end is pales in comparison to what we spend on the front end. And again, it's the same pool of funding, and we've been minimizing that, not expanding that, even if that was okay to continue to draw from the same pot. So given that, your your leadership, and I want to also compliment New Mexico partners. When you're a small state, you got to figure out how to often do it on your own, and I mean no disrespect to USDA or the Forest Service, and I appreciate your complimenting their efforts. But the reality is, we got to figure out a way to do that, and the Rio Grande Watershed Fund and getting the private sector to recognize the economics in so many ways of not participating has been phenomenal. Talk to me a little bit about replicating and the kind of federal policy that we might engage in to really not only promote that, but create that as the standard for that kind of collaboration across jurisdictions to engage in these conservation and prevention practices.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, been here for the last 2 days with the Lohr Foundation, and we've been talking, really, we've been all over the Hill, all over town, in the administration as well, brainstorming about how to build the local capacity for replication. And I do believe that the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program has laid an excellent foundation on the collaboration side of things. However, there is such a thing as skin in the game, that is putting money towards something. And I understand that New Mexico is not unique in having a legislature that is interested in making a co-investment along with the National Forest System. We've also been looking at the insurance premium tax as a potential revenue source, for example. And I think the more that the private sector and state, local, and tribal governments are helping and having at least some skin in the game through cooperative or matching funds, that is what is going to really bring about change. The necessary factor, though, that's missing from that is the capacity building. And it's primarily in rural communities. It's also within the Forest Service, because this is really a new way of doing business. And again, there are leaders throughout the Forest Service, and we have some of them in New Mexico in the forest supervisor role, and that's critical leadership. It's going to take a while, but I'm confident the Forest Service and partners will get there.
I appreciate that, and if you will keep thinking, and including the whole panel, so that we can, I'm going to use your words, accelerate that capacity building. And with all due respect to all bodies of government, sometimes government can react a little bit too slowly, and we need to figure out a way to make sure that those investments are made. Are there thoughts about, and again, as we do healthy debates about what our funding priorities are and what our long-term stability practices are, we're going to have a long-term funding strategy for these issues, and it's not something that I've participated in through this committee directly, and that's not a dig on the committee, but I think it may be time to do that. We definitely have those debates as we have legislation on the floor about whether we're really doing enough to make sure that we have the resources necessary, not only to support these kinds of collaborations, but to do what we need to do over the long haul. And if there are other thoughts for members of Congress, particularly in this committee, to entertain about how we get there in short order, I think I could probably convince the chairman to help us think about other hearings and maybe a full committee hearing to think about those strategies and see what the appetite is from this committee to address them. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Did I put you on the spot? So that'll teach you to give me.
You did just fine. Generally yields back. I got to take liberty of another round. Ms. Swanson, I want to talk the impact, and this is tough because but it has to do with continuity of leadership on our forests, and obviously I'm talking specifically with the Allegheny National Forest, and I do appreciate the Forest Service's support. We've been able to over. I guess sometime in the past 6 years or so, upgrade the forest supervisor position to another grade, hoping to make it so that it wasn't just a place where people bounced into for a short time and then went somewhere else. It seems like continuity of leadership and retaining folks. We've had, I don't know how many supervisors we've had, just since since 2009, 2008, when I was first elected. To me, I think that just because I know what it's like to come in and become a manager in an agency of, and my background was healthcare, but there's still you don't hit the ground running. It's, you don't know your team, you don't know the community, and I think that, so two-part question. Number one, do you see that has impacted from your external perspective on the Forest Service in the Allegheny? And number two, I don't know how I don't know what we do to, I don't think we have a lot of ability to retain people. We can't indenture them there for a number of period of years. But perhaps there's ideas in terms of how we help provide continuity in leadership, even so that leadership is a little bigger umbrella, and there's maybe one person coming and going every few years, but I don't know, whatever ideas you may have on that.
Well, you're absolutely right. It's had a really devastating impact on us. I think the inconsistency of that leadership has, the forest has really suffered for that. We've had 7 forest supervisors in 10 years. So that, and I think that from different perspectives, I mean, if you're working under that situation, you're going to be probably hesitant to move forward very much because each person looks at it differently. The other thing is generally the forest supervisors that have come from the West, and there is a really large learning curve. So, they really can't be expected to learn about eastern forests and the difference in the silviculture and all of those things in a year or two. It takes a good 2 or 3 years to get them up to speed, and they're not there that long. So, I mean, I would think it's having a huge detrimental impact on the rest of the staff. There is no consistency. For the industry, it's really been hard because of that lack of consistency. So, and you're asking for suggestions on how we might change that. I think that, generally people have been encouraged to move around, to move up in the ranks. Maybe if you could look at that a little differently, where people maybe are encouraged to stay in one place and allowed to rise more locally, would be helpful, so that you can maintain that legacy of knowledge. We have certainly, the differences between eastern forests and western forests are great, and many of the last forest supervisors we've had have come from western forests that do not have the same forest issues that we have in the east. It would be nice to find somebody that already has that experience when they go in as forest supervisors. So I don't know, I don't know how you really manage all that, but it really has had a huge negative impact on our forest in particular.
Wanted to get thank you for that. I wanted to get your thoughts too on, conversation I had with the chief regarding, we've, the number of million board feet is up significantly since I was first elected, but at the same time, there's just a small percentage of that, about out of 38 million board feet last year, was somewhere around 12 or 13 million board feet. There actually were green
saw timber.
Can you speak to that and just the implications of what that is for our communities?
Well, on the Allegheny, we have a really healthy diversity of those segments of the industry. We have a strong pulpwood market. We have a paper mill and particle boards. So we can use that material, but generally the engine that moves the train is the saw timber. It's valuable. The veneers, all of those that go for high-end products. And it used to be we had more like a 60% saw timber and a 40% pulpwood market, and now that's switched, and we have more like a 40% saw timber market or volume harvest and a 60% lower grade, and that really is not appropriate for a forest like the Allegheny, and it really impacts the communities as a whole, because less money is coming out in the 25% fund. And I just think overall, the higher quality products you're producing, the greater the economic value to the communities are. The sawmills can produce not only boards, but secondary manufacturing of those boards, and they can make cabinets and flooring and things like that where, so you want it to be a balance, but on the Allegheny right now, it seems to be kind of lopsided. So I'd really like for us to be able to get up to more saw timber, but still maintain a healthy pulpwood market too.
Good. Ms. Humphreys, your testimony voiced, support for expanding categorical exclusions. I know we worked hard to have a number of those in this last Farm Bill. Can you give us some examples of any potential categorical exclusions that additional ones that would be helpful or that you would support?
When you look at categorical exclusions, clearly under NEPA, the council gave good guidance that anything that's routine, reoccurring with known minimal impacts can be categorically excluded. So my comments really referred not to specifics, but in general. I know at the state level, when I managed it, we were able to use categorical exclusions, and we upheld it in the courts, and we were challenged over a broad array of timber practices that were ongoing, that we have been doing since we started our state forest system and managed it. And so many of those activities where they're relatively minor in scope or routine, reoccurring, we know those impacts and they're well understood. Our forest managers have decades of experience in that.
Very good, thank you. I know that you stated in your written testimony your support for arbitration. I wanted to check in with Ms. McCarthy and just get your, would you agree with arbitration versus litigation?
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, that's not one I can answer. I work in the zone of collaboration. I've not had any of my projects personally go to appeal or litigation, and so I have no experience to share. I'm sorry.
Nope, no, thank you. Thanks for your candid answer. Ms. Swanson, any thoughts on the use of, greater use of using an arbitration process rather than litigation?
I think we'd all rather avoid litigation if at all possible. I do think arbitration, that, I would be happy to have a process that would eliminate some litigation. We had probably 8 or 10 years of litigation on a lot of timber sales from 1996 through the 2000, and it really had a totally demoralizing impact, not only on the Forest Service, but the industry and the communities. And, no one wins in that situation. So if you can find ways to get people talking and finding value in different places in different ways so that you can bridge those gaps, I think everybody benefits from that.
Thank you. Ms. Humphreys, you want to expand on why it is you see that you've expressed support for the arbitration process?
Yeah, I would say we'd like to see some pilots with arbitration. Clearly, when you look at lawsuits around the country, there have been a number of lawsuits where it's a tactic that's being used by some organizations to try and move an agenda towards no management or slow down management. And so I think really that purpose needs to be put into the planning process and moved back to where it belongs, and that is in the planning process where we sit down and talk about what is that desired future condition of the forest. And with that, we need to try out some areas where we can try arbitration. I'm not suggesting we go to it nationwide. I think we're best served to put our toe in the water to try it, see how it works in those particular areas. I think we need to try it in areas where we are very prone to litigation in order to give it a good test. And then if it is successful, then go into a model where we move down that path.
Very good. Thank you very much. Please recognize the ranking member for an additional round of questions if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Humphries, I agree that actually, and to the whole panel, that lawsuits or the threat of lawsuits can paralyze productive efforts on management activities. And given that we're drawing both, I hope, aggressive interventions at the appropriate places, we also want that collaboration and partners so that you've got a long-standing effort to continue. So you get the continuation of not just one partner invested, but every stakeholder making sure that healthy forests and healthy watersheds, that we're doing all that work together. But it does suggest to me that this collaborative model is another very productive way that would minimize then that kind of litigious environment because people are at the table. Now, I don't want to suggest that every time you get everybody together that you can come up with a solid invested plan that all the partners stay with. But we've seen great success by partners. I'll use the development community, business community in this case, who have a very different set of priorities and different set of clients and different set of outcomes that they're looking for, who you don't typically go to in terms of forest restoration activities and management practices that weigh on the side of both conservation, but prevention, making sure simply, and you guys know this better than anyone, that we don't have such large amounts of fuel in the forest that we have these kinds of catastrophic fires. So I think it's another way, based on these questions, to really put a plug in. We need to think about ways, strategies to really promote these collaborative investments and define sources of revenues and funds that are dedicated to these practices so that you will get the unique aspects in each community so that you can manage these collaborations and identify the right priorities between forests in the east and forests in the west and in the southwest so that we're dealing with those significantly different issues in a productive way. And so I'm more encouraged by the testimony of the three and hope that as the chief is listening, thank you for staying for the hearing, that you bring to us as many practical and even big, if they're not so practical, big ideas back to our offices and back to the subcommittee so that we can think about ways to really draw these balances and start to get the investments in these issues as a priority for the committee and for Congress. I mean, that's what I would certainly like to see. Thank you very much for allowing me to make that additional, was that my closing statement, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I think it might have been.
All right.
Do you have anything to
No,
take upon?
I don't. Thank you very much.
Well, I thank the ranking member. I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you on these issues, really important issues, and I think we're doing great work. So we have a lot more work left to do. Before we do adjourn, just to share some closing thoughts, I want to thank all the witnesses. Ladies, thank you. This is a good sign, I think. I don't think, I've got a few former ag staffers in the room, I don't think we've ever had a panel on forestry where all our witnesses have been ladies. And so maybe that's what it's going to take to turn things here. So I appreciate that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Appreciate the chairman, for the chief, for staying and listening and just being a good partner with shared goals here. I want to thank everyone for bringing your passion on this issue that was very evident in your written testimony, in your oral testimony, and your expertise, and the expertise of those that you are here representing today. You bring their voice to Congress. You're actually helping all of your colleagues back home and across the country to exercise that part of the Constitution. It's so important. It's not in the Bill of Rights. It's in the main body, and that's the right to petition Congress. And we are absolutely dependent on this expertise coming here so that when we make decisions, we don't make them the worst thing in the world is when we write laws and take actions, and the only thing that we're paying attention to is inside the Washington Beltway or the Washington bubble. And I'm just really pleased with the input because I think we're approaching this serious problem in a serious way. And it's also, I'm very appreciative to all the witnesses because from the chief and this panel, because within your testimony, you brought solutions. Don't always get that. We usually paint a pretty good picture of where there's problems, but the fact is that you've taken the time and done your due diligence to really articulate some really good solutions that I think that we need to review and take a look at and see how we can how we may be able to utilize. So thank you once again to everybody. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. The Subcommittee of Conservation and Forestry hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you very much.